Hey guys, I'm not in class today, obviously, so I wanted to do a little recording of our lesson to hopefully help you with fragments, run-ons, and comma splices. So I'm just going to get started. You will each get a packet like this. Mrs. Basin was going to give you one of these, and what's in this packet truly is just the rule sheets. So we're going to go over page 3, and then I'm not going to go over page 4, but you guys, I will teach you what to do with run-on sentences and comma splices in just a couple of slides. The longest ones will be the fragments, just because there are just so many different rules, I guess. But don't overthink it. Okay, fragments basically are just incomplete thoughts. They're also called dependent because they depend on something else for them to make sense. So if you were to go into number 1 here, it says before Oliver goes to bed. And then it says our elf mistletoe somehow moves to a different spot in the house. So what you're looking for in those two groups of words would be a fragment. What doesn't make sense? What needs more for it to make sense? And when you hear it out loud, and sometimes that's what you need to do, you need to listen to it out loud. You can tell that before Oliver goes to bed needs something else. So what you can do then is just attach the two together. And in this case, because before Oliver goes to bed is at the beginning, the fragment's at the beginning, I would take out that period and put a comma. So, and then lowercase the O and hour. Before Oliver goes to bed, comma, our elf mistletoe somehow moves to a different spot in the house. Number 2, we have the sentence at the beginning. Our elf mistletoe somehow moves to a different spot in the house. That's a sentence. But then we have our fragment at the end, before Oliver goes to bed. So when the fragment is at the end, we just take the period out and we don't use a comma. So you just take the period out and lowercase the b. Number 3, before Oliver goes to bed. In this case, you can put a comma after it and then add what you want to it. Before Oliver goes to bed, comma, he brushes his teeth, period. You could swap that around, though, and avoid the comma. You can say Oliver brushes his teeth before he goes to bed and not use a comma. Okay? So those are just a couple of examples that often will be the main way to fix fragments is by adding, putting that comma in or combining two things together. Okay? But there are some other basic rules that you'll have to follow as well. So this is on page 3 in your packet. I just use the sentences from there. If a fragment is at the beginning, like I just said, always put a comma after the fragment. So in this case, number 1, since we had driven both cars, is a group of words that by itself does not make sense. We left at different times. We left at different times is a complete thought. But since we had driven both cars, it's not a complete thought. That's actually what we call a clause. And the reason it's called a clause is because it starts with a subordinating conjunction. The subordinating conjunction, or red flag word, is since, okay? And I don't know how much you guys have learned clauses, but we'll get into that a little bit more later in the try. We had driven both cars by itself is actually a complete sentence, okay? Because it has a subject and it has a verb. But the word since makes it a clause, which makes it a fragment. Okay, so since that fragment is at the beginning, to correct it, what do we have to do? You got it. Put a comma after cars and lowercase the w. On the opposite side, if the fragment is at the end, we normally, which means there are exceptions to every rule, right? Normally do not use punctuation. We left at different times, complete thought, since we had driven both cars. So again, now the fragment's at the end, just take out that period and lowercase the s. So this one, I just put what the definition of a positive phrases is here because I don't think that's actually in your packet. I guess the assumption is you're supposed to know that, but I wouldn't expect you to know that. A positive, rename a nearby noun. So if the fragment isn't a positive, you would use a comma before the appositive. So you're like, rename a nearby noun. You'll understand it once you see the example. We recently met Mrs. Bustard. Complete thought, right? Incomplete thought. The principal of our school, okay? You could say the principal of our school is Mrs. Bustard, but that changes the sentence. So you say, we recently met Mrs. Bustard. The principal of our school renames who Mrs. Bustard is or gives more information about who she is. So in this case, you put a comma after Mrs. Bustard. The principal of our school renames Mrs. Bustard, and that's why we call it, I don't know why we call it a positive, but that's what it's called, okay? So when you see that phrase that renames a nearby person normally, not always, then make sure you put that comma. Okay, that's how we correct those. And then we have clauses that describe. So if the fragment is a clause describing the word immediately in front of the clause, use a comma. So that sounds super wordy, right? So I'm just going to kind of show you up down here. I explain what a clause is. I explained it in the previous slide. It is a fragment that starts with a subordinating conjunction. I have a list of subordinating conjunctions. I'm not going to give those to you right now. I don't want to overwhelm you. But it still has a subject and verb. But once you put that subordinating conjunction or red flag word at the beginning of that sentence, it now creates this fragment. So just a couple samples. Because he is sick. That is a clause. If I took because off, I could say he is sick and make it it's a complete sentence. Since you were gone, or before you leave. Okay, so those are all considered clauses because they start with a red flag word, have a subject and a verb. So we recently met Mrs. Bustard, complete thought, right? And now this almost seems like in a positive because it does still kind of rename Mrs. Bustard, but instead we use who is the principal of our school, who is a subordinating conjunction. So just like the appositive in this case, because it really is still renaming Mrs. Bustard, we would put that comma and then lowercase the W. Okay. So hopefully that helps a little bit if you're not really understanding clauses. If you can understand that it's still renaming the nearby noun, I think that will work for you. Okay. All right. These three words, such as, including, and especially, or phrases, you always use a comma before them. When you see these three words or phrases, put a comma right before them. So Mrs. Cox likes 3 sports, including basketball. So including basketball, obviously, is the fragment. So you'd put a comma after sports. Okay. Now, if you have a list, and you could change that to especially if you wanted to. You could say Mrs. Cox likes 3 sports, comma, especially basketball. So these 3 words or phrases, because such as is more than one word, you always put commas before. However, if the fragment is a list, you can put a colon before the fragment. Mrs. Cox likes 3 sports, colon, basketball, soccer, and lacrosse. I need lowercase basketball because basketball, soccer, and lacrosse is not a complete thought. It's a fragment. However, could you use such as, including, especially there and not use a colon? I can't mark you wrong if that's correct. So Mrs. Cox likes 3 sports, comma, including basketball, soccer, and lacrosse. You could do that as well. Or especially basketball, soccer, and lacrosse. Or such as probably would be better. Such as or including. Okay? So I wouldn't mark you down if you did it that way because in all honesty, it's correct if you use one of those words or you use a colon. Okay? The key is that it's a list, though. So the one above, you wouldn't use a colon because there's only one sport, basketball. Okay, run-on sentences. You're going to see run-on sentences and comma splices basically one and the same on IXL. The reason for that is really they kind of all are run-on. People end up, unfortunately, correcting run-ons with a comma, and that creates a comma splice, which is not what you want to do. So what you need to know, sorry, I have to keep moving my face around here. 2 or more complete sentences that run together with no punctuation to separate them. I see this all of the time in writing, just like I see fragments all of the time in writing. I think what you have to do, again, if you really want to do it right, is to read it out loud to yourself, to hear it. If you hear it, you can usually figure it out. And so often when I ask students to read their papers out loud to themselves, they don't do it and they don't catch these simple errors, okay? So in order to correct, you can do a variety of things. So to correct a run-on sentence, the easiest way to correct a run-on sentence or a comma splice is to put a period. Just put a period between the 2 sentences. Make it simple. Don't try too hard, okay? However, there are a variety of ways, and this is for run-ons or comma splices, okay? You can place an end mark at the end of the first sentence, meaning a period, or if it's a question, you put a question mark, okay? Add a comma with a fanboys. So comma for, comma and, comma nor, comma but, or yeah, or so. Okay, those are fanboys. They're coordinating conjunctions. For and nor, but, or, yeah, so. Or you can use a semicolon with a conjunctive adverb and comma. So conjunctive adverbs are listed there. However, consequently, then, nevertheless, moreover, therefore. So use a semicolon and the comma. I may ask you to do this at some point in time, but what you'll see in reading is that a lot of times we'll start sentences with however, consequently. And not that that is wrong, but when we ask you to use these as conjunctive adverbs, we really want to see that semicolon, that comma. Okay? Now, the other thing that you can do is just put a semicolon between two sentences. It's basically the same as like using a period, with the exception of you would never end a sentence with a semicolon. Semicolons truly are used just like a period, but often used because we feel like these two sentences connect very well together, and we don't want that end mark to be like the last say. So a lot of people will use a semicolon when they almost want to run the sentences together because they feel like they're so closely related. Okay. But again, it doesn't matter if you use a semicolon or a period. I don't care. Or a fanboys or a conjunctive adverb. What I want you to do is just do it right and know how to correct these. Okay. So if I were to correct the run-on sentences, obviously on page 4, you can do this as well. Page 4 has different sentences, and you can write your own just for practice, but I would look at this as well. But I'm just going to give you my examples. Christmas break is next week. I cannot wait for break. So think about where it would be obvious to put a punctuation mark, obviously at the end, but it obviously shows that you're running it together. It's hard not to take a pause when you want that period. So Christmas break is next week, period. I cannot wait for a break. Again, you could say Christmas break is next week, comma, and I cannot wait for the break. Or, you can correct it however you want. Or I can put a semicolon between week and I. Santa Claus is heading to town. Oliver may be getting coal. Okay, pretty simple. You can kind of figure out where the two sentences run together, town and Oliver. So Santa Claus is heading to town, semicolon, however, comma, Oliver may be getting coal. Or Santa Claus is heading to town, comma, but Oliver may be getting coal. Santa Claus is heading to town, period. Oliver may be getting coal. Or semicolon. Again, do what's easiest for you, okay? Mistletoe, the elf, is watching my kids. He has been witnessing some very bad behavior. Okay, so I think you could probably hear it where I need to put my period. And I would put that between kids and he. A period, a semicolon, a comma with fanboys, or a semicolon with a conjunctive adverb. Okay, I'm going to keep repeating that because if I repeat it enough, you'll remember, right? So, comma splice, again, same thing, same way. The one thing that you don't want to do with run-on sentences is correct them with a what? A comma, because then you've created a comma splice. So to correct comma splices, you do exactly what you would do with a run-on sentence. Period, comma with fanboys, semicolon with a conjunctive adverb, or a semicolon. Okay? So just some examples of comma splices. This first one is actually kind of hard, just because it looks right. Zoe thinks it's silly to buy Oliver a kitchen for Christmas. However, I think he will like it. So this is considered a comma splice because we have a sentence on one side and a complete sentence on the other side. Zoe thinks it's silly to buy Oliver a kitchen for Christmas. Complete thought. I think he will like it. Complete thought. Okay. So realistically, even if however weren't in there and you just put a comma, it's considered a comma splice or a run-on, whatever you want to call it. So to correct this, the best way to correct this, because however is already there, is to what? Put a semicolon right before however. Okay? Or if you really wanted to do it, you could just cross out however and put a period between the two, or a semicolon. Okay? I put this next one on here because sometimes that however is fine just how it is. Zoe thinks, however, that it's not a good idea. That it's not a good idea is not a complete thought. So realistically, this however is fine. This however is what we call, and you'll learn it in the commas, a parenthetical expression. So it's not needed. I call it an interrupter. It just is like a transition to interrupt the flow of the sentence to help you transition instead of using a filler word if you're speaking. So this one is correct because we don't have two complete sentences on both sides of however. Okay. The next one, Santa's bringing Oliver a Kenmore stainless steel kitchen is sweet. Okay. For some reason, we didn't put a comma in there. So it's not really a comma splice. It's a run-on. So you'd put a period or semicolon or whatever in between kitchen and it is sweet. I guess I forgot to put the commas for the comma splices. So I found some coal in our yard the other day that may have been left there for my kids as well. Okay. So I would put if I put a comma after day, that would be a comma splice. I found some coal in our yard the other day, period. That may have been left there for my kids as well. You know what? You could actually keep this. This could be fine, depending on how you say it. I found some coal in our yard the other day that may have been left there for my kids as well. That's not a very good example. I'll just be honest with you right there. No, the more I say it, the more I'm like, you could put a period, or it might actually just work the way it is because this is a clause here that may have been left there. Okay. So, bad example, but we have other examples here. Okay, so look those over. Make sure that you understand that before you do the IXL assignments today. There are 3 of them. So what I'm going to tell you right now is just do your best. Try hard for a solid 30 minutes. If you get to 30 minutes on each one and you're not at that 80 score, just go to the next one. I don't want you spending hours and hours on IXL. If you're not being successful, don't get frustrated. Just do the half an hour and try. And then we will, on Fridays or our last day of the week, whenever that is, I will give you a separate assignment, a recommended assignment from your IXL. I'll have you do that to make up any points that you may have lost for the other. I know the goal is 80, but that doesn't mean that in the end, when you spend a half an hour on it, if you get a 70, that I won't give you the points. I'm going to give you the points because I can see how much time you spent on it. If you get a 7 and you only spent 10 minutes on it, or a 70 and you only spent 10 minutes on it, then I won't give you the points. Okay. If you spent a half an hour on it and I know that you tried and took your time and you did your best, then that's what I need to see. Okay. So there will be 3 assignments on there. And you may be able to get through one today, and you may be able to get through 2 today. But whatever you don't get done today is your at-home learning tomorrow. So just complete those 3 IXLs for Friday. Okay? Have a good day. Be nice to Miss Layson. Of course you will be. Okay? I'll see you later.